In order for the keynote, it is my honor to introduce Mr. Vincent Cochetel. Mr. Cochetel has been appointed in Tunis as UNHCR Special Envoy for the Central and Western Mediterranean situation as of 1st of June 2017, and since March 2024, he's based in Geneva, assuming the same functions and assisting the Division of International Protection of UNHCR with other mixed movement routes. Mr. Cochetel joined UNHCR in 1986 and managed UNHCR field offices in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. He also participated in several emergency operations in Asia, West Africa, and Europe. In September 2002, he was appointed as Director of the Investigation Unit of the Inspector General's Office at UNHCR headquarters here in Geneva. In May 2005, he became Deputy Director of UNHCR Division of International Protection and Director of the Resettlement Service. Mr. Cochetel served as the UNHCR Regional Representative for the United States of America and the Caribbean, based on Washington, D.C., and from August 2010 to February 2013. He assumed between 2013 and 2017 the functions of Director of the Bureau of Europe of UNHCR and UNHCR's Regional Refugee Coordinator for the refugee crisis in Europe for 2015 and 2017. It is an honor for us to have you here, Mr. Cochetel. He's going to be presenting to us the topic of the increasing risk of trafficking in the context of reinforced border measures, the reliance on smugglers by refugees, and how refugees should not be penalized for irregular entry. And at the same time, he's going to be providing us examples of the work of UNHCR in this sphere. Thank you very much, Mr. Cochetel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to share with you some observation this morning. First of all, thank you also for being here, for your commitment to being here. I know there was a lot of concurrent events taking place at the same time, not the best timing, not the best location, but thank you very much for demonstrating your interest and commitment for the topic. So I'd like to say I'm not an expert. I've been almost 40 years with UNHCR, long beyond. I'm not an expert, but what I'd like to share with you is a bit of my feeling. You know, some of the lessons learned over those years, and some of the recent trends I have observed. On coming here this morning, I'd say, well, it should not be just another event. You know, what is new? What is new? Do we see sign of hope? And how do we approach things a bit differently? So the first lessons I've learned over those years, and saw that increasingly during the pandemic time, was yes, reinforced border measures, border protection measures, automatically increase the need for smugglers. Hard border measures create business opportunity for smugglers. That's logical. People will continue to move. It's a market-driven business. Okay. I'm not saying, and we are not saying, that reinforced border measures are not necessary. States are sovereign. They may decide to harden border control. But then we need to look at the solutions. And the solution must be better identification of victims of trafficking, victims of some of the smugglers at the border. And we need also to keep in mind that in the case of refugee, people should not be penalized just by the mere fact we have crossed the border irregularly. Article 31 of the Convention is clear. If people report without delay, if they show good cause for their illegal entry, their irregular entry that is motivated by a fear of persecution, they should not be penalized. So, and we saw it with the war of aggression on Ukraine, when refugees benefit from protection-sensitive entry and admission system into neighboring countries, the risk of trafficking is diminished. So that's the first lessons learned. I mean, there is nothing we can do about, deciding whether states want to opt for stricter border control measure, but there is an automaticity in consequence in terms of increased need for smugglers. The second lessons learned is states are always too late in their response. Because states are convinced they can do it alone. Only law enforcement measures to combat smuggling and trafficking will do the trick, but states are always too late. As I said, it's a market driven by demand, and smugglers and traffickers are quicker than states to adapt to this changing economy and business opportunities. They love crises. They prey on those crises. I don't know if you read that article yesterday in the press showing that many of the Syrians fleeing the situation in Lebanon, Syrian refugees, they are now using smugglers to go back to Syria. They want to avoid the official border crossing for the men, to avoid immediate enlistment into the Syrian army. So the smugglers know there's the business opportunity. So they offer services to those people to go back to Syria without being noticed. So they prey on vulnerable victims every time there is crisis. Another thing I realized during a field trip in Djibouti is to see people returning by boats from Yemen, Ethiopia, mostly migrants, some refugees among them, but mostly migrants, coming back from Yemen. So they went to Yemen from Djibouti using smugglers. They were confronted to trafficking risk in Yemen, could not make it to Saudi Arabia to look for work there, and then they have to buy back, contract another smuggler to go back to Djibouti. So, they double dip on the trip, business opportunities are available, and they provide services. And when I say states are always too late, traffickers are much more clever, they adapt. A couple of years ago, it's now 5-6 years ago, in East Horn of Africa, you had children recruiting children, recruiting clients in refugee camps, in refugee settlements, in IDP camps, in urban areas, with that motto, go now, pay later. Very attractive for many people, go now, pay later. If it's free, why should not try? Of course, it was a lie. Next border you cross, people are forced into labor, into other form of exploitation, sexual exploitation, and so on, and all the way to the intended destination for some, but all the way on that route, they have paid, they have to coerce, they are in bondage situation vis-à-vis those traffickers. But very attractive scheme. Now, we see the development of that now in Senegal, on that route leading to the dangerous journey, 8 days by boat to go to the Canary Islands. Smugglers tell the people, go now, pay later. Some people can't believe it and start questioning what's behind. And there's nothing behind. This time it's really free. The crossing is free for some of them. But in Spain, recruiters are there to make sure they pay back. And put pressure on the family back home in the community. So it's free to go. But the exploitation is going to last for a number of years, irrespective of the place of destination of those people. So why can't be also as innovative? Why can't we be all together more innovative to adapt to the response and to the offer smugglers and traffickers put along those routes? And I think that's a question for all of us. And one of the elements of the response is we need, yes, a robust law enforcement approach, but not just a law enforcement approach. We have to work on prevention in a much smarter manner. The previous speaker spoke about legal pathways. Yes, that's one of them. But, legal pathways will never address all the needs for movement. This narrative that more legal pathways will reduce irregular movement. Yeah, it's a nice political talking point. I make it also myself. But is it true? Do we have evidence to back that up? I leave it to you. Third lessons learned. Encampment policies. I'm just leaving the ExCom room. I'm hearing about some states saying, well, yes, we will expand the camp. We will have new settlement. Yeah, will that fix the problem? No. Encampment creates conditions for trafficking. When rights are restrained, people need to feed their family. They don't survive on the assistance we provide them with the generous funding you give us. This is not true. They survive because they find little jobs here and there and often get exploited. And so encampment, especially protracted encampment, as the encampment situation lasts in average 19 years on the African continent. And protracted encampment creates conditions conducive to trafficking. And on the same for many reservations that states have passed when they ratified the 1951 Convention, restriction on key economic social rights. And I've not heard at the EXCOM about states lifting those reservations. As long as you maintain those strict encampment policies on those strict limitations in terms of access, for instance, to the right to work, well, there'll be an offer. Outside of the camp, there will be an offer, and people will get crushed in trafficking networks. So that's an area where we need to move, and we talked a lot during this executive committee about sustainable programming, not having parallel system, schooling camps, school outside of camps, having only one system to which refugee can be enlisted. And this is to reduce that vulnerability to trafficking and reduce to that temptation of it's going to be better elsewhere, and let's embark on those dangerous journeys. So, but let's look at that. The fourth lessons learned is that it's also imperative that the discussion on trafficking, that we acknowledge that some victims of trafficking never move beyond their national borders. Many people are too poor, too vulnerable to afford what the smugglers ask them. But it doesn't mean that they are free from exploitation. I think at the level of the Global Protection Cluster, UNHCR, in partnership with IOM and others, has been looking at that, has been trying to work on some pilot project. We know that in 11 countries, protection against trafficking has been seen as a priority. And I think it's important that we focus on those areas, on those pilots, and try to draw some lessons that could be useful for other IDP situations. Finally, the last lessons I'd like to draw is year after year. I'm always an optimistic of the will. I'm a bit of a pessimistic of the reason. I don't see progress. We came up recently with a report where we documented what services, protection services, are available in 14 countries along that route leading to the central Mediterranean Sea. And we've done this survey a couple of times, and year after year we see services decreasing. So less services. And then services are not located where the risks are the highest. The risks are the highest in border areas where humanitarian actors are not present. And we don't need to be present everywhere. And we don't have the resources to be present everywhere. But let's work with the local authorities, those who can identify. Let's recognize the local authorities can be the first responder and make the adequate referrals. But along many of these routes you have black spots. Nobody is available. No services are available. And year after year it reduces. So we're not better. But we need to concentrate on areas where we can make the difference. We need to concentrate on areas where it's not convenient for us to work. But on those areas that migrants and refugees are going to use, are going to meet the traffickers, and are going to experience problems. I think it's also important to recognize that more services for the victims of trafficking will not solve everything. It will not stop trafficking. So of course you need law enforcement action in parallel, on robust law enforcement action. But it needs to be more balanced in the approach. And what I see is mainly law enforcement action that is driven towards containment at certain border, return, Article 9 of the protocol on trafficking in person. I see very little happening in terms of Article 6 and 7, all the services that should be available to victims of trafficking, including access to justice. So again, it's our collective responsibility to go back to basics, provide those services, collaborate with the law enforcement, but have this rule-based approach to combating trafficking and protecting victims of trafficking along these routes. Those networks are transnational. They operate across communities, and having state or national center action will not work. They're more equipped than states. They move and they work across the border more easy. So we need to take that into consideration the way we approach that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cochetel, I mean, it was very enlightening, at least for me, to hear very concrete examples from different areas, and these words of realism that smuggling and trafficking are businesses, and we have to be pragmatic and we have to be quick, and that law enforcement per se, law enforcement towards returns and containment is not enough. Law enforcement also speaks about guaranteeing access to justice for the victims. And then there were some very concrete examples that I promise I will use in our courses in San Remo as well. So I'm taking notes to hopefully you don't have copyrights on that, but it's on, they go now and pay later as a first step towards trafficking. And that exploitation doesn't happen only at the place of destination, but it's on the whole route, and some of them never reach the area of destination, and that some of victims of trafficking never even manage to cross the international border and leave their own country, and these are the internally displaced people who are victims of trafficking. Thank you very much on this. I have another question for Mr. Cochetel, also coming from the audience online. What key measures are needed to strengthen the accountability of perpetrators and access to justice?
Well, first again, are we making progress there? Well, the UNODC reports a decrease, 27% reduction in the number of convictions of traffickers worldwide. So that means there are less traffickers being sentenced overall throughout the world. I try to zoom on one of the regions where I work more, the MENA region. We have a decline in the number of detected victims by 40%, so less identification, and that translates into an 18% decrease in the number of convictions just for the MENA region. So that means we're not making progress. Again, I come back to that, we're not making progress. So why trafficking is not taken as seriously, trafficking in person, as drug trafficking, as terrorism, as transnational crimes that can destabilize countries and that crush human beings. So I think we need a couple of questions around that. Why there is no better information sharing among states? I know Europe is spending a lot of money, debriefing people arriving at the border. Europol keeps that information only for 6 months because that's the data privacy regulation in the European Union. Is that information shared with countries, let's say, upstream all the way through the route? Do we share that information? No, we don't share that information. Why? Because, again, of data privacy consideration or do not have consideration, fine. But, traffickers share information. If states do not share information, there will be no actionable data for law enforcement agency to do the job. 2 is victims of trafficking. I see everywhere focusing on Africa, so I should not say everywhere, Alem as a better and more global perspective. Victims of trafficking, once you have identified them, the first thing is, yes, quick shelter, maybe a bit of medical assistance, and then quickly back home. Article 8 of the protocol, repatriation of the victim of trafficking as always the best solution. Well, I question that. It's not always the best solution. The debt, as Adam has explained, has not been paid. Those people will have to continue to pay for the debt. And going back home may create some risk for the person being trafficked, re-trafficked, or for the family, and will have collateral damage. So I'm not saying that every victim of trafficking should get a protective status as a possibility offered in the Palermo Protocol on trafficking in person, but we need to recognize that the victim of trafficking has certain rights in terms of access to justice. And very practically, beside the right-based approach, if we don't use the victims, if we don't protect the victims, when we don't have a case, we don't have evidence. People are returned, and traffickers have a free pass. There's no victim. Or if there is a complaint, there is no longer a victim to testify. So it doesn't go anywhere. So that system is broken and needs to be revisited with serious efforts to protect key witnesses, including relocating them in some places. The Kingdom of the Netherlands has done that with some victims of trafficking on the route to Libya. And to achieve successful prosecution, they had to remove, they use UNHCR resettlement program, they use some of the witnesses there to lead to some successful prosecution. So that's what needs to happen, is to recognize that victims of trafficking do not only have rights, but they can be useful in successful fight against trafficking. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much. My question comes both as a board member of the British Refugee Council, but also as a friendly member of the Assembly Institute. So one of the challenges we've seen in our natural context in the UK is the deliberate conflation of policy level between smuggling and trafficking. Now this is done to very cynically justify the further criminalisation of victims, but also to vilify those generally making irregular journeys. Now, this increasingly means that laws designed to protect survivors, such as the Historic Modern Slavery Act, is now being undermined and rewritten or reinterpreted in such a way that many people who are currently in detention are considered both perpetrators and their own victims. So my question is, as civil society or survivors or other stakeholders, how do we overcome this increasingly hostile climate to ensure those who most need protection are able to receive it? And it's open to whoever wants to answer it. Thank you.
Well, I don't know, I can only respond for as a representative of a humanitarian organization. We need to look at it as core business. It's a key protection risk now, we know, for IDPs. It's a key protection risk for migrants crossing borders. It's a key protection risk for asylum seekers and refugees. We have the data to support that trafficking in person is a key protection risk. So it's not a work for specialists. You can always have specialists on everything, but it affects the life of people. It can lead to loss of life. There's a very serious impact on people and communities. So we need to treat it as a core protection issue. And it's not like that. It's not mainstream at all in our response in humanitarian settings. So that's one problem. About the conflation of smuggling and trafficking, I agree with you. We need to be careful here with the narrative. The legal definition will serve one purpose. Where I come from is on the African routes leading to North Africa. The closer you get to areas of conflict, you have a level of coercion. But it's very difficult to speak anymore about smugglers. The smuggler becomes a trafficker. And we need, I think, also to change a bit the way we approach it. Sometimes we look at people who are victims of trafficking as people who have done something wrong. You know, they put themselves into that trap. You did not need to take a smuggler. And then Yeah, fine. Okay, I agree with that reasoning. On the other hand, let me use that example. I'm an Eritrean refugee in France. My wife and my kids are a refugee in Eastern Sudan, in Kassala, in the camp. So to get family reunification in France, which is not a legal pathway, it's a right. You have a right to family reunification. How do I get a pass to go outside the camp? To go to the French embassy to file an application for family reunification. Well, I can't get the pass. Strict encampment policy. I cannot go to the embassy, there is no more embassy. So I'm going to be told, you need to go to another French embassy, maybe in Uganda. Well, no, I can't cross border. So what do I do to get access to that right? Well, if I'm wealthy, or if I don't have resources, I'm going to borrow money. I'm going to buy smuggler services. Because at the end of the day, that's the reality that we refuse to see. It works. It works for many people. If there is a market, it's because there are successful outcomes. So unless we are serious also about creating a credible alternative to that, we're not going to defeat the business model of smugglers. They are more successful. And while we are talking about those alternative pathways and legal pathways to create, let's be serious. They're so small. I mean, beside Italy and few European countries, I'm not talking about the US here, vis-à-vis Africa, nothing is happening. There's no legal pathways. They don't exist. So we can't responsibly and credibly talk to people about considering alternative pathways. They don't exist. So, there's a long life ahead for smugglers and traffickers. We have no alternative to offer at this stage.